yours. Senator Seward.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise to support this proposition that on the failure of the Abbott government to deliver a budget that promotes fairness and opportunity. This budget does not support fairness and it does not support opportunity. Mr Hockey, the Treasurer, claimed in a speech last week to the Sydney Institute that we all want a society that protects the poor and strengthens the weak. His budget does exactly the opposite. It does not protect the poor or strengthen the weak. In fact, it builds in the very opposite. It does not provide a view that, or it does not support their view that there is the responsibility of government to provide equality of opportunity with a fair and comprehensive support system for those who are most vulnerable. It certainly does not. Since when does dumping young people under the age of 30 onto no income support at all, in anybody's sense of what's fair? He certainly has a perverse sense of fairness if he thinks that is fair. How does he think these young people are going to eat, live, put a roof over their head, turn up to 40 job applications a month, to turn up to even the face-to-face meeting that they're supposed to do once a month? When you have no money to eat, when you have no money to clothe yourself, to catch a bus, to even own a phone. It's okay. In estimates, the Department of Employment said, well, you might be able to just ring up. Well, if you haven't got any money, how do you afford a phone? How do you afford even that phone call, let alone the stamps or the computer or the emails to make those 40 applications a month that you're supposed to be making? And if you miss your face-to-face or don't meet your compliance requirements when you're on New Start nil payment, you get another month of no income support. Since when is that fair? Since when is that providing opportunity? When I asked how a young person is to make even the co-payment of $7. For a start, the department got it wrong and said the first 10 are free, which is wrong. But of course, they've got the limit of 10. That's still $70. When you haven't got any money, $70 is beyond your reach. As I said this morning, the department and the government doesn't even know how many people under 30 live at home. That is not fair. People on disability support pension being reassessed if you're under 35 and dumped onto New Start if they're lucky to maintain income support at all. Indexation on DSP cut so that it's the CPI, which is what New Start has been at. New Start, we already know, makes you live in poverty and has not kept up with the true cost of living. Again, that is not fair. Single parents, indexation cut, education support, pension education concession cut. How is that fair? FTB, which will take even the department's cameo example, showed that a single parent would lose $2,000. That's multiple cuts to single parents. How is that fair? How is that creating opportunity? This budget builds in inequality. How do students' fees face $5 billion in cuts? University fees can go up to $100,000. And who's going to be impacted by that significantly? Beyond across the board. But women. Women are going to be the most heavily impacted by those cuts, by charging fees. And in America now we're seeing that people that have had to take out these very expensive loans, it's impacting on their ability to actually sustain a mortgage or to take on a mortgage. So we're building yet more barriers to young people and to young people's futures and to young people's opportunities. Not to mention the fact that this government has cut a whack out of or is not going ahead with NRAS and social and affordable housing. We know homelessness is getting worse. Now, the government knows that this budget is unfair because they have actually budgeted more for emergency relief funding, $229 million over 4 years. They don't know how it's going to be applied yet, but they know that young people are not going to be able to live. So you build an emergency relief, so then they have to go to charities. But unfortunately, our charities are already overcommitted. And in Western Australia in 2012, where the latest figures are available, 20,000 requests for support had to be turned away. Some charities are now having to put in processes where you can only ask for support once every 6 months. How is this fair? How is this budget building an opportunity? It simply is not. It's building an opportunity for the richest in this country, where we know that 1% own more wealth than 60% of the rest of the community. We know that we have inequality in this country already. What this government is doing in this budget is building in further inequality. And let's look at pensioners. Pensioners, although they try by this little trick in estimates in question time today to say, oh, are they not going to get an increase? This government knows very well that they, through cutting indexation, they actually cut the rate of growth of the pension and it becomes less value, it increases less quickly, and ACOS has estimated that builds in a cut of around $80 to $100 a week to pensioners. When you're on a fairly low rate, although I must say it's more than you start, I acknowledge that, but it's still a low rate. Ask any pensioner that's trying to survive on the pension whether they are living in the lap of luxury. I can tell you they're not. That builds in barriers to opportunity. Older Australians, a third of the long-term people on New Start are older Australians. They're facing barriers to employment. They're now going to be forced, because the government hasn't put in measures that significantly address the issues around age discrimination and older workers trying to find jobs. We need to see the plans for addressing that before they raise the age pension to 70. They're building in measures that affect people across the board. Attack on universal health care. That is what the $7 co-payment is about, is undermining universal health care. One of the fundamentals to Australians believe to a fair, compassionate society. That is not fair. That is not compassionate, and it's certainly taking away people's opportunity. And who is that co-payment going to affect the most? The most vulnerable in this country, the people with the least money that won't be able to afford to go to a doctor. When people ask, will it put them off? Yes, it will put them off. And believe me, most Australians think this isn't fair. Certainly all the people that have been emailing, coming to our meetings, are extremely distressed about this budget. They see what it means to people. They see how unfair it is. They absolutely cannot believe they're expecting young people to live on no income. That builds in disadvantage. It entrenches poverty. And once you're in poverty, it becomes yet another barrier to employment. When I asked how people could access even basic things in terms of when they're living on no income, would they be able to access the employment pathway funds to pay for their co-payment? They couldn't tell me. Would they be able to access it to buy clothes, to even be able to turn up to interviews? They couldn't tell me. This is an ideologically driven budget where they confect a welfare crisis, which, as I said this morning, the Hilda report quite clearly shows now that is nonsense. Less people are reliant on income support than were 10 years ago. That is a confected crisis. The budget emergency is a confected crisis. This is ideologically driven approach to those that are most vulnerable in this country. Far from being fair, as Joe Hockey claims, it is unfair. It will not improve inequality in this country. It will increase inequality in this country. This is, and they were so keen to bring in these cuts, they haven't actually thought through what it means. They haven't actually thought through what it means to cut a full-time disability commissioner, or maybe they did actually, maybe they did think that through, because the people that are going to be affected by this budget, people with disabilities, the first person, one of the people they can turn to make a complaint is the disability commissioner. So we'll cut that out, We won't have a full-time one of those. What's the highest level of complaint that the Human Rights Commission gets? You guessed it, about disability. That's
Thank
what
you,
they're up
Senator
to.
Siewert.